What we're going to talk about over the next hour is one of the most important issues, I think, facing our government. We've sat here today and listened to a lot of very valid pleas, really, for help from the federal government. And the reality is, we don't have the money. There are 4 words that I have not heard in the United States Senate or Congress, actually, since I've been here over the last year and a half. And that is, we cannot afford it. The problem is right now we have a budget crisis. We have a debt crisis. Now let me say this. Fixing the budget process will not solve the debt crisis. Let's be very clear about that. But we will not solve the debt crisis unless and until we address the dysfunction in our budget process. The problem is that in the last 42 years, since 1974, the Budget Act of 1974, the budget process here has only worked 4 times. This is a chart, Mr. President, that charts this out. The yellow lines here, and I hope the people at home can see, I hope my colleagues can focus on this, only 4 times in the last 42 years has this budget process that was enacted in 1974 actually functioned at all to fund the federal government. Now, one of the major responsibilities of our jobs here in the Senate and the House is to fund the federal government, to take care of discretionary needs like we've heard today from Flint, from Louisiana, from West Virginia, from Maryland. These are valid needs. But, Mr. President, every dime that we spend in our discretionary spending is borrowed. And I'll talk about that a little later. We've got some speakers today that are going to talk about the results of not having a budget process that works. And this chart explains that over the last 42 years, since 1974, 4 times have 13 bills, appropriation bills, actually been passed, and we've funded the government the way we're supposed to. Now, the blue lines are the actual appropriation bills. Now, since 1998, somewhere in there, we went from 13 bills to 12 bills that actually fund. These are appropriation bills that fund the federal government. And they fund $1.1 trillion of a $3.9 trillion spend of the federal government. And this chart shows that over the life of this law, these are the laws, the appropriation bills that have been passed each year. And the average is the red line. It's very light. You probably can't see it. But the average over this period of time is 2.6 of the 12 or 13 bills that have to be passed to fund the government. 2.6. And over the last 19 consecutive years, Mr. President, we've used 107 continuing resolutions to get past the fiscal year to make sure we fund the government on the first day of the new fiscal year. Now, next Monday, this is how serious this is. Next Monday is the first day of the next fiscal year, FY17. And we sitting here today are voting on the CR, the continuing resolution, to get us past this day so the government doesn't have to shut down next week. Those dreaded words of irresponsibility and intransigence. And quite frankly, this is part of the problem, because what happens is what happened last year. The dysfunction in the system is centered around this. The budget is not a law, it's a resolution. That means that the majority, with 51% of the votes in this body, can pass its political statement, and that's exactly what happened last year. And let me say this, Mr. President, before we go any further. Everything you hear today is nonpartisan. This should be about a nonpartisan exercise that we have in funding the government. Yes, we're going to have debates based on our partisanship and based on what our beliefs and principles are. But the basic process should be a politically neutral platform that allows us to argue our differences out in the budget process, get to a budget, move to the appropriations, and fund the government by the end of the fiscal year. And we have only done that 4 times in the last 42 years. The dysfunction is centered around this. If you look at this chart, every year, we just don't have enough time. Basically, it's not just time, but it's the process. If the budget is based on, it's a resolution, and 51% can vote it forward. Last year, as an example, the majority, the Republican majority, by the way, voted a political bill that took $7.5 trillion out of the president's budget over the next 10 years without one Democratic vote. Then we got to the authorization process, and the authorization process, oh, by the way, is a law, and they have to have 60 votes. So guess what? The people on the other side of the aisle, my friends, have stood up and said, well, you didn't ask our opinion in the budget process. Why do you want our help now? And so they don't let us get on the appropriations. And we've got some $310 billion that we're funding today that are not authorized. Over $256 agencies and programs. The next thing is we go to the appropriation. Again, the minority party can stop the process by not letting us get on the bills. We have a situation right now, and this is nonpartisan, but it's a reality, that the defense authorization, the defense appropriation bill, which funds our military, was passed unanimously in committee. The way it was supposed to operate, Democrats, Republicans got together, worked it out, made amendments, and came up with a bill that funded our federal government's military. And yet, we tried 6 times to get it to the floor. And there are political reasons why it hasn't gotten to the floor, but it shows the dysfunction that we have in this process. Mr. President, the time has come for us to address this process. And I'm so excited to have various members of the freshman class. We have the chairman of the Budget Committee coming down. We have some other senior members who have been working on this for years. But I noticed my good friend from the state of North Carolina, Senator Tom Tillis, is here. And I'm going to ask him to give us his perspective. They have a big military effort in their state. And Tom has been a soldier in this, not only in the Senate, but in his time as Speaker of the House in North Carolina.